The moment I walked into the grand hall of the Blackwood Pack, I knew something was wrong. I could feel it in the way the air shifted, in the way conversations died mid-sentence, in the way 200 sets of eyes turned toward me, not with curiosity, not with welcome, but with that particular kind of cruelty that only comes when a crowd senses blood in the water. My name is Sarah Calloway, and I had made the catastrophic mistake of believing that tonight would be the night everything changed. I was 21 years old, newly shifted, and according to every elder in my small border pack, I was something called a late bloomer, a wolf who didn't complete her first transformation until a duel. Thud. It was rare. It was considered. And fortunate. In the old traditions of our world, it marked you, set you apart, made others look at you the way they were looking at me right now, like you were something that had crawled in from the cold and hadn't quite earned the right to stand on two legs. But I had been invited. That was the thing I kept reminding myself as I smoothed the hem of my dark green dress and lifted my chin against the weight of their stares. I had received the formal summons, sealed with the Blackwood crest, a silver wolf mid-howl against a black moon. The Alpha's claiming ceremony was the most sacred event in the Northern Pack territories. Every unmated wolf between the ages of 18 and 25 was required to attend. No exceptions. Not even for late bloomers who still smelled faintly of uncertainty and borrowed confidence. The Blackwood Pack was the most powerful in the region. Their alpha, Kaiden Blackwood, was 24 years old and already a legend. I had never met him. I had only heard stories. That he was massive, built like something carved from the mountains themselves. That his eyes were the color of winter ice. That he had turned down every arranged match his father had proposed because he believed, with an almost arrogant certainty, that fate would deliver him his true mate when the time was right. I wasn't stupid enough to think that was me. I was Sarah Calloway. I came from a pack of 40 wolves on the eastern border. My mother had died when I was 12. My father had remarried into a stronger bloodline and quietly made it clear that I was more an obligation than a daughter. I had no rank, no notable lineage, no political value. I was here because I had received a summons, and you did not ignore a summons from Blackwood. So I squared my shoulders, reminded myself to breathe, and walked deeper into the hall. The space was magnificent even through my anxiety. Vaulted ceilings threaded with iron chandeliers. Long tables draped in black and silver cloth. The smell of pine and cedar and roasting meat thick in the air, layered beneath the electric, animal scent of 200 wolves in one room. Candles everywhere, on the tables, on the windowsills, in iron holders that stood as tall as men, casting everything in warm gold and deep shadow. I found a seat near the back of the hall, close to the door, the way prey animals instinctively position themselves near exits. I told myself I wasn't prey. I told myself to stop thinking like that. The ceremony began at midnight. The great doors at the far end of the hall opened, and Kaiden Blackwood walked in, and I understood immediately why people told stories about him. He was tall, absurdly, almost offensively tall, with broad shoulders that carried the easy authority of someone who had never once in his life been uncertain of his place in a room. His hair was dark, pushed back from his face, slightly unruly in a way that suggested he didn't particularly care about appearances and didn't need to. He wore a black shirt rolled at the sleeves, dark trousers, and the Blackwood crest at his collar, and somehow, dressed like that, with no ceremony to his clothes. He looked more powerful than anyone else in the room who had dressed to impress. His eyes swept the hall as he walked, cataloging, assessing. And then, in one of those moments that the universe reserves for its most spectacular cruelties, his gaze found mine. I felt it like a physical thing, like a hook beneath my sternum pulling. My wolf stirred, suddenly awake in a way she almost never was, pressing forward inside me with an urgency that made my breath catch. Him, something deep and wordless said. Him. I was on my feet before I'd made a conscious decision to stand. Later, I would tell myself that I hadn't known what I was doing. That the mate bond, newly formed and tested, overwhelming for someone as inexperienced as me, had simply overridden my better judgment. That I hadn't meant to step forward, hadn't meant to break from the crowd, hadn't meant to walk toward him across that open floor with 200 wolves watching. But I did all of those things. I walked toward Kaiden Blackwood in the middle of his claiming ceremony, in front of his entire pack, guided by something older than thought and more honest than pride. And he looked at me, really looked at me, for one long, suspended moment, and something moved across his face that I couldn't read. Something complicated and fleeting, gone before I could name it. Then his expression closed down like a door slamming shut. He held up one hand. The hall went absolutely silent. "Stop," he said. His voice was low, but it carried the way alpha commands always carry into the bones. Into the part of you that is still animal and still obedient to hierarchy. My feet stopped, my whole body stopped. He looked at me for another moment. Then he looked at his beta, a lean, sharp-faced man named Dorian who stood at his right hand, and something passed between them. Dorian's eyes cut to me and then away quickly. The way you look away from something embarrassing. Kaiden turned back to the room. "This ceremony," he said, his voice still measured and quiet and carrying effortlessly through the space, "is for pack members. For wolves with standing, with lineage." His eyes returned to me. And they were cold. I hadn't been wrong about the color, winter ice. Pale and clear and utterly without warmth. Not for strays. The word landed like a slap. I heard someone laugh. Heard several people laugh. Heard a murmur run through the crowd like wind through dry grass. And I knew what was in it, relief mostly. The particular collective relief of a group of people who had been waiting to see how the outsider would be put in her place, and were satisfied that it had happened so quickly, so cleanly, so publicly. My face was burning. "She's nothing," I heard someone near me whisper. Late bloomer from a border pack, what was she thinking? Does she actually think she's his mate? Someone should escort her out before she embarrasses herself further. I should have left then. Every rational instinct the first possessed was screaming at me to turn around, walk to the door, get in my car, drive the 4 hours back to the eastern border, and spend the rest of my life pretending this night had never happened. Instead, because I am apparently constitutionally incapable of doing the smart thing when my pride has been activated, I looked straight at Kaiden Blackwood and I said, very clearly, so that the people nearest to me could hear it, "I felt the bond." "I think you did too." Another ripple through the crowd. Sharper this time. Disbelieving. Kaiden's jaw tightened. It was the only thing that moved in his face. "You felt nothing," he said. "You're a late bloomer with an overactive imagination and no understanding of how things work in a real pack. There's no bond. There's nothing between us." He let that sit for a moment, and then he added, with the precise, surgical cruelty that only very powerful people can deploy, "Go home, little stray. You don't belong here. You don't belong here." I turned around. I walked out of the hall. I kept my back straight and my steps even, and I did not run, because the only thing I had left in that moment was my own dignity, and I was going to hold onto it until the doors closed behind me, and I did. The night air hit me like cold water. I stood in the gravel drive outside the Blackwood estate and breathed, and breathed, and breathed, and waited to feel something manageable. What I felt instead was the mate bond, and it did not care about dignity, or public humiliation, or the logic of what had just happened. It sat in the center of my chest like a hot coal, insisting. "Him, shut up," I whispered to my wolf. She didn't. I had been given a room in the eastern guest wing of the estate. All ceremony attendees from outside the pack were housed on the grounds for the weekend, another tradition I now deeply resented. My room was small and plain, clearly meant for minor guests, at the far end of a corridor that smelled of old wood and cedar oil. I locked the door, sat on the edge of the narrow bed, and spent approximately 2 hours having what I can only describe as a very thorough personal crisis. I went over every possible explanation. I was wrong about the bond, possible, given my inexperience. I had misread a basic biological reaction to a dominant alpha and embarrassed myself in front of 200 people, also possible, also mortifying. Or I was right about the bond, and Kaiden Blackwood had felt it and rejected it anyway, which meant he was either the most disciplined wolf alive or something was very, very wrong. By the time I'd run through all of it twice, it was past 2 in the morning. I had cried exactly once, briefly, and stopped myself, because crying felt like giving the evening more power over me than it deserved. I had washed my face. I had changed into a plain white sleep shirt and sat cross-legged on the bed with my hands in my lap, trying to decide whether to leave at first light or wait for the formal end of the weekend, when I heard footsteps in the corridor outside my door. They stopped outside my room. The silence that followed had a particular quality to it. Dense, held, the silence of someone on the other side of a door making a decision. Then a knock, not loud. 3 quiet, deliberate raps. Every hair on my body stood up. My wolf was instantly, completely alert, all her attention arrowing toward the door with an intensity that left no room for anything else. I knew who it was before I opened it. I sat there for a long moment and asked myself whether I was going to open that door. Whether I had any business opening that door. Whether opening that door was the act of someone with self-respect, or the act of someone who had already been humiliated once tonight and was lining herself up for the second round. I opened the door. Kaiden Blackwood stood in my corridor. He had changed from the ceremony clothes. He was wearing a plain gray shirt now, dark jeans, and he was barefoot, which for some reason struck me as the strangest detail of all. This massive, cold, powerful alpha standing in my doorway in his bare feet like a man who had left his room without thinking about where he was going and arrived somewhere that surprised him. He looked different than he had in the hall. In the hall he had been a performance, controlled, deliberate, armored in authority and the weight of 200 watching eyes. Here in the dim corridor with no one watching, he looked like a man who had been fighting himself for hours and was exhausted by it. He looked at me for a long moment without saying anything. I let him look. I was not going to make this easy. You should lock your door, he said finally. His voice was different too, lower, without the carrying quality he'd used in the hall. More careful. I did lock it, I said. You knocked? Something moved in his face. Not quite the beginning of a smile, not that, but something that might have been the memory of what a smile felt like. Sarah, he said. Just my name. Like it meant something. You know my name. I've known it since the moment you walked into the hall. He said it like a confession, like something that had been weighing on him. I knew everything about you from the moment I saw you. That's what the bond does. My chest tightened. You said there was no bond. I know what I said in front of your entire pack. I know. He looked away from me for a moment, his jaw working. I wasn't trying to. He stopped. Seemed to regroup. When he looked back at me, the control was back, but thinner now, worn down to something more honest underneath. Can I come in? Give me one good reason why I should let you. Because I owe you an explanation. You owe me more than that. I know that too. I stood back from the door. He came in, and the room, which had felt small before, became immediately smaller. He stood near the window, as far from me as the room allowed, and for a moment we just looked at each other. To people separated by 6 feet of floorboards and one enormous, complicated, impossible thing neither of us had asked for. Tell me, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then there's a treaty. Between Blackwood and the Pharaoh Pack, the pack to the north of us. It was signed by my father before I was Alpha. The terms require that the Blackwood Alpha mate within either the Blackwood bloodline, or the pharaoh bloodline within 6 months of taking the alpha position. He paused. I took the alpha position 8 months ago. The silence stretched between us. I'm 2 months past the deadline, he continued. If I don't fulfill the treaty terms, Pharaoh has grounds to challenge the Northern Territory boundary. We'd lose a third of our land. Hundreds of wolves in the contested territories would be absorbed into Pharaoh's pack under their terms, not ours. His voice was completely steady, the voice of a man who had been living with this weight for a long time and had trained himself not to show it. Pharaoh's alpha is not a good man. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed because my legs were not entirely reliable. You have an arranged match, I said. A pharaoh daughter. Lena. She's 22. He shook his head. It doesn't matter. The point is that I have an obligation. An obligation that involves hundreds of my wolves and a significant piece of our territory. And then you walked into your ceremony, I said slowly, and felt a mate bond. With a late bloomer from the eastern border, who has no political value and no connection to either Blackwood or Pharaoh bloodlines. He said it without cruelty this time, not the way he'd said it in the hall. He said it like a man reading out the terms of a sentence. Yes. And you decided to reject it. I decided to protect my pack. By humiliating me in front of 200 people. He stopped. Something in his composure cracked, just slightly. That was not what I intended. I intended to be brief. Dismissive. To make it clear there was nothing there so that no one would question the arrangement with Pharaoh. He looked at me directly, and his eyes were not cold now. They were complicated, untired, and something underneath both of those things that I didn't have a name for yet. You stood your ground. You said what you said. I panicked. Alphas don't panic. This one apparently does. I looked at him for a long time. He held my gaze without flinching, without the armor of the ceremony, without the crowd to perform for. Just a man in my room in the middle of the night who had driven himself here by something he couldn't outrun. Why are you here? I asked. If your decision is made. If your obligation is clear. Why are you standing in my room at 2 a.m? He didn't answer right away. He turned to the window and looked out at the dark grounds, the silver-edged shadows of the pine trees, the pale wash of moonlight across the gravel. His hands were at his sides, but I could see the tension in them, in the set of his shoulders, in the line of his jaw. Because I can't sleep, he said finally. Because since the moment you walked out of that hall I have been unable to think about anything except that I did to you exactly what has been done to me my entire life. He turned back from the window, and there was something raw in his expression now that I didn't think he showed people very often. My entire life has been the treaty. The obligation. The pack's needs before mine. I know what it feels like to be told that what you are is not enough. That who you are doesn't fit the requirement, that you should simply be different and it would all be easier. His voice was low and very controlled. And then I stood in that hall and I said it to someone who had done nothing except feel something true. And I said it in front of 200 people, and he stopped. You feel guilty, I said. I feel like I became something I swore I'd never be. The room was very quiet, outside. The wind moved through the pines with a sound like breathing. I should have told him to leave. The rational, self-protective version of me, the one that had been building walls since my father remarried and quietly stopped seeing me, was very clear on this. This man had humiliated me publicly. The fact that he had reasons, even reasons that made some kind of painful sense, did not erase the sound of 200 people laughing. Did not erase Stray. Did not erase the 4 hours I'd spent in this room putting myself back together. But my wolf had gone very still. Not the urgent, insistent him of the ceremony hall, something different now, quieter. More certain. The kind of stillness that comes not from distance but from recognition. He came, she said in that wordless way he came. Sit down, I said. He looked at me, You came all the way to my room, sit down. He sat in the small wooden chair near the desk, which looked slightly absurd under him, too small and too plain. He sat in it anyway, forearms on his knees, and looked at me with that complicated, exhausted expression that I was starting to understand was just his face when he wasn't performing. I need you to understand something, I said. What you did tonight hurt. I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt, or that your reasons make it not hurt. They don't. I walked toward you because something in me that doesn't know how to lie told me to, and you used it to make an example of me in front of your entire pack, and that is, I took a breath. That is something I'm going to carry for a while. You should know that. I know, he said quietly. But, I continued, I also understand obligation. I understand being told that who you are doesn't fit what's needed. I understand packs and politics, and the weight of other people's survival can sit on one person's shoulders until there's no room for anything else. I looked at him steadily. I understand that you're in an impossible position. Something shifted in his face. Not relief, he was too careful for relief. But something loosened, very slightly. That doesn't mean I forgive you, I said, not yet. I'm not asking for forgiveness tonight. Then what are you asking for? He was quiet for a moment. I don't know, he admitted. And it sounded like the truest thing he'd said all night. Like a man who had moved through the dark, guided entirely by instinct and arrived somewhere real without a plan for what to do next. The bond, I said carefully. When you felt it. In the hall. What was it like? He looked at me for a long moment. Then, like the ground becoming solid. For the first time. In a very long time. He said it simply, without decoration, the way people say the things they've been thinking but haven't said out loud. I have been carrying the pack since I was 19. My father got sick. I stepped up. Every decision I have made for 5 years has been about the pack, the territory, the treaty, the numbers, the politics. Every single one. He paused. And then you walked in, and for approximately 30 seconds, I was just a man standing in a room feeling something real. And then I looked at you and I thought about the treaty and Pharaoh and the 140 wolves in the contested territory, and I did what I've been trained to do since I was a child. His voice was even. I made the choice that served the pack. Even when it broke something else, even then, the candle on the desk had burned down to a guttering inch. The room was mostly moonlight now, silver and pale, filling the corners with soft shadows. What happens, I said slowly, if you complete the treaty? If you go through with the arrangement with the Pharaoh girl? He looked at me steadily. The bond doesn't go away, he said. That's not how it works. It dims. If a wolf rejects a true mate bond and completes a bond with someone else, the original. He paused, choosing his words. It becomes a wound that doesn't fully heal. You carry it. Both wolves carry it. He looked at the window again. I've seen it happen. In older wolves. You can see it in them, this place where something was supposed to be and isn't. And the Pharaoh girl. Does she know about the bond? No one knows about the bond except you and me. I absorbed that. Kaiden, I said. His name felt strange in my mouth, the first time I'd used it. He looked at me the moment I said it, with a sharpness that suggested my name in his mouth and his name in mine both carried more weight than ordinary names. I'm not going to tell you to break the treaty. I'm not going to ask you to choose me over your pack's welfare. That's not, I shook my head. I am not that person. And even if I were, it would be wrong. He nodded slowly. But I need you to do something for me, anything, he said. He said it immediately and completely, without qualification. The way the bond says things before the rational mind can moderate them. I need you to go back out there and figure out whether there's actually no other way. Not whether it's the easiest way, or the most politically clean way. Whether there is genuinely, truly no other path. I held his gaze. Because if you're going to carry a wound for the rest of your life, I want you to at least know that you looked at every alternative first. He was very still. And if there's no other way? He asked quietly. Then there's no other way, and I'll go home to the eastern border and we'll both carry it and eventually we'll both be okay. I said it with more steadiness than I felt. But you came to my room in the middle of the night for a reason. Kaiden, and I don't think that reason was just guilt. The silence stretched between us, long and full, and waited with everything we hadn't said yet, everything that would take longer than one night to say. His eyes were on me. And in the moonlight they were not cold at all, they were very awake. Slowly, he stood from the too small chair. He crossed the room toward me, 3 steps that somehow felt like much more, and he stopped just in front of me. Close enough that I could feel the warmth he threw off. Alphas always run hot, like furnaces. Like banked fires, close enough that the bond resonated between us like a plucked string. He lifted his hand, very slowly, the way you move around something you're afraid of startling, and touched the side of my face, the lightest possible contact, just his fingertips at my temple. And exhaled. Sierra, he said just that. I know, I said. I'm going to fix this. You don't know that yet. No, he agreed, but I'm going to try. His hand dropped. He stepped back. He was putting the distance back between us deliberately, carefully. The way you close a door you're not yet ready to walk through. I need you to not leave tomorrow. Why? Because I'm going to call my father's legal counsel in the morning. I'm going to look at the treaty. The actual text of it, which I should have done 2 months ago instead of simply accepting what I was told it said. Something had changed in his expression. The exhaustion was still there, but alongside it now was something that looked more like resolve. Every treaty has details. Specifics. My father was many things, but he was not a careless man. He wrote that treaty to protect the pack, not to trap his son. His jaw set. I want to know exactly what it says. You're saying you've never read it. I've had it summarized to me by advisors who have their own interests in how it's interpreted. He looked at me with something that was almost wry. I'm 24 years old and I've been running a pack for 5 years and somehow I never thought to question the interpretation. He paused. You make me want to question things. I looked at him for a long moment. You're asking me to trust you. I'm asking you to give me until tomorrow evening, he said. That's all. Stay through tomorrow. Let me make some calls, read the actual document, and talk to you again. After that, whatever you decide, I won't stop you from leaving. The candle guttered and went out. The room was all moonlight now. I should have said no. Every self-protective instinct I had said no. But my wolf was sitting in my chest like a hearthstone, warm and certain, and she had never in her short life steered me wrong. Until tomorrow evening, I said. He nodded. He moved toward the door. Kaiden, he stopped. The thing you said in the hall. I kept my voice neutral, but I let him hear it beneath the neutrality. Don't say anything like that to me again, ever. He turned back to look at me, and there was no armor in his face at all. Just a man who knew exactly what he'd done and what it had cost. Never again, he said. I swear it. Then he was gone. The door closed quietly behind him. I sat in the moonlit room for a long time, my hand pressed to the place in my chest where the bond lived, that hot, insistent, terribly inconvenient coal, and breathed. I was still Sierra Calloway. Still from a border pack of 40 wolves. Still a late bloomer with no rank and no lineage and no political value. Nothing about me had changed. But somewhere in the east wing of this estate, Kaiden Blackwood was not sleeping. He was sitting with the weight of a treaty and a bond and a choice he hadn't been prepared to make, and something in me, the part that had walked across that hall without being told to, the part that was older than pride and more honest than fear, was not afraid. Whatever happened tomorrow, I had done the true thing. I had walked toward what was real. He had run from it and then walked back in the dark, barefoot and honest, and said I'm going to try. That was not nothing. My wolf settled into her hearthstone warmth, and I lay back on the narrow bed, and for the first time since I'd walked into that terrible, brilliant hall, I slept. Tomorrow would bring the treaty, the text, the details buried in the language of obligation. Tomorrow would bring a conversation in the early gray light with a man who was beginning slowly to choose. But tonight there was the moonlight through the window, and the pine trees moving in the dark, and somewhere in this enormous house, the quiet certainty of a bond that had not asked permission and would not, no matter what came next, be unmade. Some things, once true, remain true. This was one of them.